Hey, Motorman here, and this week I'm going to talk about the coming 2026 Harley Davidson entry-level motorcycle. Now, I don't have any more information than that, but that's what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to give you my feelings about them coming out with an entry-level motorcycle. Before I get into that, though, I want to talk about the video that I did last week, which I thought was hilarious. Basically, what it was making fun of all the people, the naysayers and the experts in the comment section who claim that Harley Davidson will be out of business by probably next Tuesday, and they're over motorcycles. Nobody's buying them. Nobody wants a Harley Davidson. So, when I thought about this and I explained it to my wife, she said something like, well, I think that some people might not get it. I said, I'm going to make it so incredibly stupid. I'm even going to point out motorcycles that are obviously Harley Davidsons and say it's a Rebel or a Royal Enfield. But, she was partially right. And the good thing is she didn't say, I told you so.
I told you so.
Okay, she did say, I told you so. But besides that, the whole point of the video was to make fun of those people. And I thought to myself, you got to be a real moron not to understand that this is sarcasm, or like I said, a parody, and making fun of those people who claim to know everything, and that's why they're in the comment section of YouTube. Anyway, with that said, by the way, if you haven't seen that video, it's got 130,000 views. It was a very popular video, and I would say about maybe 15% of the people didn't get it, and I think mainly not because they're stupid, but probably they didn't watch the video. It was only a 4-minute video. They might have watched the first 30 seconds and said, this guy is crazy. Yeah, it was because it was so ridiculous. Okay, so let's talk about the 2026 coming entry-level Harley Davidson motorcycle. So the point of an entry-level motorcycle, of course, is to get younger riders into the showrooms to start with a Harley Davidson motorcycle, and then, a year or two later, or whenever, when they want a bigger motorcycle, they'll stay with Harley Davidson. They'll have some brand loyalty. Now, Harley Davidson has tried this before. In fact, way back in the 70s, when small little Hondas and Yamahas started to become popular, Harley Davidson said, well, we'll get a bike that'll compete with those. But they knew, even back then in the 70s, that if it's made in America and it's got American parts made by union workers, that there's no way they could compete price-wise with cheap Hondas or Kawasaki's. So they went to an Italian company, Aramici, and I think they started with a 125, went up to a 150, and then a 250, even a 350cc bike. And they sold a few of them, but that bike, as compared to the similar bikes from Yamaha and Honda and everybody, it wasn't near as good or as reliable. Why they went to the Italians, who are known for making unreliable bikes that had all kinds of electrical problems. But it didn't work. Later on, then, in I guess the 2015 or so, they came out with the street line of motorcycles, the Street 500 and Street 750, and they didn't do very well at all. In fact, I think the parts were made in India and the bikes were assembled here, but whatever. They weren't a bad motorcycle. I've ridden them, and they compared very well to other 500cc and 750cc motorcycles made by the Japanese manufacturers or Royal Enfield or any of the others. But to me, it didn't sell well, and I think that's because it really didn't look like a Harley Davidson motorcycle. It looked more like, well, a Yamaha or a Honda or a Suzuki. And of course, people said, well, why should I go for that money? And they were priced right. I think they started at, I wrote it down here, the 21 Street 500 was $6,899, $6,900, and the 750 was $7,600. So in the $7,000 to $8,000 price range, which is priced right in there with the Honda 750 Aero and the Yamaha Bolt and a few of the others. Yeah, like I said, I think it compared well as far as riding, performance, etc. But people don't, in my opinion, don't go to Harley Davidson dealers looking for an entry-level motorcycle. In fact, even now, while sales are down, their biggest sellers are still their most expensive motorcycles, the baggers, the Street Glides, and the Ultras, and those motorcycles. That's why people go to Harley Davidson. Can they build a motorcycle, which, by the way, according to Harley, it's going to be somewhere around the $6,000 price range? I would think that would have to be like a 500cc bike, and I don't know, to me, if you're going to do that, you should make a 750cc motorcycle. And once again, if you can't bring back the older Sportster 883s, and you can't make any money on those, well, maybe you need to redesign the motorcycle that looks like a Sportster, because the Nightster, to me, yeah, there's some resemblance, but it really doesn't look like a Sportster. But the Sportster was just a good-looking bike from any angle, especially the 48. I like that wide, fat tire in the front. It was just a good-looking bike, but it was up in around $10,000, $11,000 price range when they discontinued it in 2022. If they could make something similar, and I'm sure they can, I mean, they should be able to make a bike that looks just like their older Sportster, but with maybe modern running gear, maybe have the Rev Max motor in the 750cc range and give it 70 horsepower or 75 horsepower, and maybe sell it for, I think it's going to have to be more than the $6,000. I'm thinking more like $7,500. In fact, right now in this country, from what I've read on the internet, and you know, I take that with a grain of salt, the biggest selling motorcycle in the U.S. is the Kawasaki Z650. It's got a parallel twin. I think it makes about 68 horsepower. I've ridden them. They're a great motorcycle, especially for the money, which is, if you get ABS, they're about $7,700 plus freight and stuff. You're talking about an $8,000 price range, and that's supposedly the biggest selling motorcycle in the country right now. So if you can make a bike that's as good as that, but looks actually like a Harley Davidson motorcycle, rather than make it look like, I don't know, a Yamaha or a Honda or whatever, I think they got a shot at it, especially if they can keep it in that same price range, $7,500, $8,000. I think $6,000 is going to be just too cheap. You're going to have too small a motorcycle, 500cc or less. And yeah, those bikes sell, but mainly they sell it in foreign countries where there's miserable traffic and nobody commutes 50 or 60 miles to work on a 500cc or 250cc motorcycle. So yeah, it's probably worth a try. If it's made in China, you know, Harley Davidson has the Chinese 350 that they use for their Rider's Edge course. And it doesn't look like a bad motorcycle. The tank is sort of reminiscent of a Harley Davidson tank, but they don't sell it to the public. It's just for their Rider's Edge course. If they're going to take that motorcycle and start selling it to the public for that $6,000 price range, I don't think that's going to work. I think if you're going to have an entry-level motorcycle from Harley Davidson, and to get people into the Harley Davidson showroom, it's going to have to be priced right, somewhere in that $7,000 to $8,000, $8,000 at the most price range, but it has to look and probably sound like a Harley Davidson motorcycle. So that's my feelings. Hopefully whatever they come out with, it works for them. Whether or not it's actually going to happen, like I said, they've tried it before, and it's been a complete failure every time, because people don't go to Harley Davidson for cheap motorcycles. They know where to go. If you want a cheap motorcycle, there's dozens of them out there. There's the Royal Enfields and the 22 horsepower, and you know, I don't know, people buy them. They don't intend to go touring with them, because if they tried it one time, well, by the time they got 50 miles down the road and their hands have vibrated and they've fallen asleep and you can't put any luggage on them, I mean, it's just, it's not the ideal touring motorcycle. It's good for around town, and that's about it. So that's my feelings. Hope you enjoyed this. Please subscribe and take a look at that last video. If you happen to miss it, because it got so many views, and you tell me how soon or how long it took you to get the fact that I was screwing around with people, I was messing with people. It was satire. Thanks for watching.